Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley, and this is Relax, Relate, Revise, a writer's editing guide. For a lot of writers, especially ones just starting out, the most daunting task is actually finishing the novel. But let's say you pass that hurdle or are well on your way to finishing your novel. Congratulations! However, there are a few steps between having a finished manuscript and sending it out into the world, whether that means sending it to agents, self publishing, or even posting your work online. So today we're going to talk about that weird in-between space where editing and revisions come into play. But before we dive into all of that, I have a question for you. Have you heard of the hero's journey? It's a concept that we see often in stories, particularly fantasy novels. But in general, it describes the story arc your characters go through during all the trials and tribulations of their story. You can see it pictured here. As you can tell from the diagram, our hero has a call to adventure, which then leads them through several tasks and situations that help them evolve and complete whatever their mission is. I like to think we as writers also have our own hero's journey. Our call to adventure is that great idea you want to turn into a story. And everything that comes after, the blood, sweat, and tears you pour into your work to make something fantastic, strengthens your creativity. So be proud of wherever you are on your path to becoming an amazing writer. So let's say you're on that path, putting in the work until you have a finished draft. You're happy with this huge accomplishment, but deep down, you know the story could use a little more work. You're trying to figure out how to do that. Well, my top thing not to do is don't jump headfirst into rereading and editing the manuscript. You may think you're powering through, but in reality, your mind and creativity need space and time away from your work before you can come back to it with a fresh perspective. And now you're like, okay, Ashley, where do I begin instead? You just want me to sit here and do nothing? Yes, at first. Well, actually, first make sure your manuscript is saved in multiple locations and your work is backed up. But after that, take time to celebrate your achievement, whether that is going out with friends, buying something new, whatever that means to you. After finishing a manuscript, I suggest you take at least 2 to 3 weeks away from what you've written. But writers more well known than me also have their suggested time away. Stephen King, for example, suggests 6 weeks of recuperation time so you can have a clear mind to spot any glaring holes in the plot or character development. However, you can aim for something more in the middle. Just know that taking time away from a story doesn't make you lazy. Just because you're not working on that particular manuscript doesn't mean that your subconscious has stopped percolating on ideas in the background. Also, this is a time to draw inspiration from other hobbies and things you may have neglected while being cooped up in your office. Okay, so let's say you forced yourself to step away from the keyboard or notepad and took a well-deserved break, and now you feel ready to edit. First, I will say you need to think of your editing and revising in terms of stages so you don't get overwhelmed. Your first draft of the manuscript is just that, a first draft. It's the compilation of all the wonderful ideas and characters in one place. Your second pass through the manuscript, aka the second draft, is where you can tackle things from a big picture perspective. I know it's tempting to want to focus on grammar or other tips you've heard about finding repetitive words or phrases and removing them. While these things are helpful, there's no point in getting hung up on grammatical points or repetitive words if you have bigger plot hole problems or issues with characters. I'm not saying to ignore blatant errors if you see them and can correct them quickly, but if your revising turns into spending an hour reworking a page or chapter, we've gotten lost in the woods. That's why I say for the second draft, focus on the bigger things, major inconsistencies, world building issues, and point of view, to name a few. When revising, there are several different techniques you can use. Even though you are the writer, try to approach the story as if it's your first time reading it and getting to know the characters. If you spent enough time away from the work, it truly might feel like that in some ways as you go through the manuscript. If you work better with a hard copy, you can print it out at a Kinko's or Staples and make physical markings and comments on the story. You could also use a notepad to make notes as you go along. Reading your work aloud is also a really great way to see how the sentences flow and how dialogue sounds. Depending on what software you're using, you will also have other ways of keeping up with your edits. Microsoft Word has the track changes feature, and Google Docs has version history, so you can see what you've done. So after you finish going through the manuscript, making your notes, take time to fix anything that comes up. If you've noticed a world-building issue, address it. Plot holes, work to find solutions. You may be thinking, I can't fix all of this on my own. It's okay to ask for input from people you trust on potential solutions you're considering. I love to brainstorm with other writers, and you can ask friends or fellow writers their thoughts. However, don't send the full manuscript without asking, or before you've done your due diligence on editing the second draft. After you've gone through all the major things that need to be fixed, you can do that grammatical check that's been driving you crazy. Once you feel the second draft is as good as it's going to get, with your eyes on it, you can start asking for feedback. Now the extroverts might be yelling, "Yay, feedback!" Or if you're not, "Oh no, anything but feedback. My gentle artistic soul can't handle that." I'm here to tell you, you can handle it, with grace and with getting the most out of the process. Getting feedback on your literary baby feels terrifying, but keep in mind you're not sending it to an agent that's going to reject you. You're sending it to people who you trust to give fair, constructive feedback. We're going to list a few examples of the type of readers you might reach out to for this first look at your novel. So I've listed a few types of people that you can reach out to for feedback. Beta readers are people who read in your genre and would be the most interested in your kind of story. Beta readers will generally be willing to read your work for free. Now you can have friends or family read your manuscript as well and be beta readers, but a lot of times this comes with complications. It's harder for friends and family to give feedback that isn't tied to their relationship with you and wanting to encourage you in your writing or not hurt your feelings. Thus, if you do solicit feedback from them or any beta readers, I suggest having a list of points you would like feedback on. That way you can help address the particular areas of the manuscript you are worried about. You can find beta readers on online communities like Wattpad or other online writing communities. Critique partners are also a good place to get feedback. You can find writing critique groups by looking into writing organizations in your area, online communities, or through sites like meetup.com. Make sure the boundaries are established on how feedback will be provided. If you feel up for it, you can also get an editor's opinion of your work. In this instance, you're not paying the editor to actually edit the full manuscript. This is sometimes called a manuscript critique or edit letter, where they are giving their overall take on the work. It's also a good way to feel out if the editor might be right for you. Alright, now even if you have established critique boundaries and what kind of feedback you're looking for, the feedback still may not be what you're wanting to hear. Prepare yourself for that. No matter how attached you are to your story and characters, different people will have their own opinion about them. However, there are a couple ways you can handle receiving feedback. If meeting in person, practice active listenings. If you have questions, jot them down and ask the person after they finish giving their feedback. Try not to be defensive and thank them for their time. For feedback forms or critiques, it's a similar process. Take time to absorb the feedback rather than reacting to it on the spot or in that moment, and thank them again for providing feedback. I say after you get all the feedback and all this info, take a week or two to reflect on it. However, if you're having trouble seeing if the feedback is actually going to be helpful or actually bad, here are a few ways you can think of it. Good feedback offers clear reasons as to why something isn't working for the reader. Bad feedback is vague, offers no examples, and also doesn't feel true to the vision of your story and characters. I know dealing with feedback can sometimes feel like hitting rock bottom, or what I like to call along the writer's journey, the death and rebirth phase. You might feel like you just dropped into a pit of despair, but all of this is going to make you an even better writer. But still, all of the hard work you're doing might leave you feeling burnt out. The reason why it's so important to take breaks from your work is to mitigate the chances of feeling that way. If feedback or the editing process is affecting your health in any way, take a break. It's important to practice self-care to get past the harder parts of the writing process. Here are a few suggestions of things you can incorporate into any writer's self-care routine. You can take a walk or spend time outside. Getting some form of physical activity or being outdoors often helps relieve stress and helps you recenter. Meditation is also a great way to refocus your mind and achieve a better sense of inner peace. Indulge in your other hobbies or get involved in another interest, whether that's arts and crafts, tech related, or even volunteer work. Fostering your other interests can help you remember having a perfect book isn't everything, and you have so much more to offer the world than just your writing. You can also journal to get your feelings out or find inspiration elsewhere, whether that you're pulling inspiration from music playlist or feeling inspired by a piece of media you love. Once you're feeling refreshed and refocused, you can circle back to the manuscript and feedback. Based off of what you've learned, you can make the changes you feel will make your story as strong as possible. Afterwards, you can ask if one of your first readers would be willing to read the revised version. Or if you feel ready, you can move on to hiring a professional editor. Even if you think you've done a great job getting your novel in shape, it's still a good idea to have a professional or freelance editor help polish your book. Depending on your budget, you may not be able to spend a ton of money on an editor, but you have a lot of options to find a good one, and most of them will be willing to work out a payment plan that works for both of you. My favorite place to hire freelance editors is Reedsy.com. They have editors for hire on there, as well as freelancers that provide other services like illustration or cover design. There are also a lot of other online sites like Freelance Writer's Den, Kirkus Reviews, Upwork, etc. You can also ask fellow writer friends for referrals or recommendations. You do want to make sure your editor has experience editing books in your genre and that they have very good, clear communication skills. Of course, it'll also be good if you can find this editor's portfolio website online so you can see more about their past work and how their process works. However, I do have one word of caution. Avoid a potential scam by steering clear of companies that promise to do the editing and all the other book production and distribution for a fee. These are called vanity presses and are often not legitimate businesses with questionable clauses in their contracts. Vanity presses are often appealing to first-time authors because it feels like a lot of the work is being taken out of their hands. However, no legitimate publishing company will charge the author for a production of a book they're acquiring. So let's say you find a few reputable editors you want to hire. Each editor provides their own variety of editing services, so here's some terminology you should know so you can choose the best editing service for you. So when you find prospective editors and you either visit their website or talk to them, they're usually going to have tiers of editing that they do. So a developmental edit, also known as content editing, is where an editor provides detailed feedback on the bigger picture issues. That would be fixing major plot holes and elements that don't work. It's similar to an edit letter or manuscript critique we've mentioned earlier, but more detailed. Now, while you may have addressed this in your own revisions and with beta readers, you might still decide you want an editor to take a look at these things as well. A structural edit can happen with developmental editing or separately depending on how your chosen editor operates their business. Structural edits focus on flow, style, and the writing quality. Depending on what editor you choose, they might use either developmental edit or structural edit in their terminology. A line edit is where an editor goes through your writing line by line to make sure your writing is clear without awkward or cliche sentences, and they provide suggested changes. Our last two types of editing are copy editing and proofreading. Copy editing can include making corrections to spelling and punctuation. It usually focuses on grammar, word choice, and enhancing overall writing. Proofreading is the final step in traditional publishing processes. Proofreading focuses on any remaining spelling and grammar mistakes, typography, or anything that looks a little funky or out of place on the page. Copy editing and proofreading, since they focus on more of those minute issues, tend to cost a little less than the other types of editing we've discussed. Let's say you find a good editor you want to work with. Here's a general idea of what that might look like. Generally, you would reach out to the editor letting them know what kind of editing you need. The editor may then schedule a time to consult with you on how they run their services and give you a quote on the pricing. So editors do tend to charge by the word count or page, it just depends, but they will give you a quote based on what you're looking for. Once the two of you can come to agreement on the work and payment arrangement, you'll send the manuscript over, and the editor will work to get the revised manuscript back to you in a certain time frame. This is generally called a turnaround time. It can range between 2 to 6 weeks depending on the type of editing and the editor's workload at the time. Once the editor has completed the work on the manuscript, they'll return the edits to you. Great editors may also have a final call with you if you have any questions about the edits or notes, because let's face it, when you receive your manuscript back full of markings, you may have a few questions on how to proceed. Again, I urge you to take some time to process the notes and try not to feel daunted or upset by the editor's corrections or suggestions. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your book and you get to decide what changes to keep or leave out. Once you have time to consider all of this and talk with the editor about any remaining concerns, you can make whatever changes you feel your book needs. Does that mean I'm ready to start submitting to agents, Ashley? That depends. If you feel like you want to spend more time fine-tuning the novel, you can definitely work on it and potentially get more input. After making relevant changes to the manuscript and making sure it's grammatically and technically ready, it's up to you to decide when you're ready to send out the manuscript. If you are planning on submitting to agents, also known as querying, here are some additional resources that can help you during that process. Agent Query, Query Tracker, and the Poets and Writers database are great places to find agents and publishing companies that are accepting submissions. I really like Query Tracker because it gives you tools to keep track of how many editors you submitted to, although I do recommend keeping a list for yourself on your own computer. The Writer's Digest websites, their books and resources are great places to get more details on editors and the publishing process in general. If you're worried about how you should make a query letter, QueryShark is a website/blog run by an agent, Janet Reed. QueryShark goes over common query mistakes and shows you examples of good queries as well. Thank you for taking the time to check out this presentation. I hope it has been helpful, and I wish you all the best in your writing and adventures and endeavors. If you want to watch more informative programs like these, you can find them on GCPL's YouTube channel. Take care and happy writing.